Thank you for joining us today. This is the National Community Action Partnership webinar series. I am Amy Gendusa English, Project Director, Energy Partnerships Project, and today we'll be speaking with Allison Moe and Juliana Williams from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Next slide, please. Before we get started, I do want to let everyone know that we are promoting the Certified Community Action Professional Program. So if you are not yet a CCAP, now is the time to apply to enroll in CCAP credentialing for 2023. Visit communityactionpartnership.com/CCAP. Oops, next slide. All right. We are going to say the promise of community action. I know that most of the participants today are community action folks, so you may already know this. Feel free to come off mic and say it with me if you'd like. I forgot to say in the beginning that we do like to have our webinars in meeting mode because we want everyone in the network to be able to see and hear each other and interact. I also encourage everyone to take a minute to introduce yourselves in the chat because we have a lot of new folks joining the community action and weatherization world, and we love to get to know each other. The promise of community action. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. Thank you. That felt a little bit like a very solemn ceremony. Next slide. Great. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Juliana and Allison from the National Renewable Energy Lab. I know that many of you are already familiar with the wonderful work that NREL does. They do support the weatherization program for the United States Department of Energy on a regular basis. They have a lot of training modules that many of you may have already taken, and they're here today to tell us about some exciting new materials. And I know that you're going to find all of the information that they provide very useful. And I do want to let everyone know as well that there is time built into the slide deck for question and answer at specific points. If you have a question in between, feel free to post it in the chat, but there's also going to be a specific Q&A segment. Go ahead, NREL.
Thanks, Amy. So hi, everybody. My name is Allison. I work at NREL. Amy gave a great explanation. We're one of 17 national labs funded by the Department of Energy, and NREL has been supporting the Weatherization Assistance Program for decades, really, almost more than a decade, in a lot of different ways. And we're going to talk through some of those ways today. So the information we're going to be sharing comes from a continuous improvement workshop, which NREL hosted back in August on the topic of new tools and approaches to support sort of how the Weatherization Assistance Program gets implemented across the U.S. Juliana, do you want to wave? Okay. So the two of us will be sort of tag teaming this event today. So a little bit of background up for people who may not know what the continuous improvement workshops are, but NREL has been hosting these for 4 years, and they evolved from some of the things that you see listed here on this slide. But really, they came out of a desire to create a space for DOE to hear directly from a variety of weatherization stakeholders on the ground about what's working, what's not working, what are challenges, and how DOE might be able to help address these issues. So since 2019, NREL has organized and led these workshops. We've had usually 2 or 3 a year to help. And they really like what we do is we talk through topics and we brainstorm challenges and potential solutions, and then support DOE in trying to figure out how can they address those challenges in the work that they do and support the WAP network through things like policy guidance, resources, other tools. And I will say that there have been a lot of changes that have come about as a direct result of these workshops. So I'm not going to read through all of these right now. You guys will have access to slides later, but these are just some examples from the different years that we've been hosting these workshops of things that have, a comment that was made or made by several people or a discussion that was had in a workshop that resulted in a direct change within the next year, a couple of years that DOE has implemented. So they take them seriously. They really, there are layers to how communication happens in the weatherization world, and so this is an opportunity sort of to bypass those typical structures and have more direct conversations, and NREL just helps facilitate those. Just want to put out there what these workshops are. You may have seen, emails from NCAP or energy.gov or other whatever listservs you may be on, inviting you to participate in these. And we just want to let you know that they are a thing, what they are, what they do. We would love to have you join us in future years. So for today, the objectives, we're going to first summarize the key takeaways, as I mentioned, from the workshop that we had in August of this year on the future of WAP. We're going to discuss some of the tools and technologies and approaches related to electrification, workforce and training, as well as sort of program administration and management. We're going to share these resources, and then we do want to get feedback from all of you. So the workshops themselves are a really big feedback sort of sounding board session. And so we want to take the opportunity today, while we have a much larger audience than when we're able to have participate in the actual workshops. We want to make sure that the things that we were hearing resonate with you. Is there anything missing? Does anything seem not quite right? So we do have that sort of built-in Q&A, and we can, communicate things to DOE as they make sense. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Juliana from NREL, who's going to talk through the discussion and feedback that we had at that August workshop around electrification and decarbonization in WAP.
Great, thanks, Allison. So it's nice to be here with everybody. So we can go to the next slide. Just a word on kind of how we decide what to touch on in the continuous improvement workshops is that at least last year, and we're hoping to do this more frequently, we sent out a questionnaire to our stakeholders through NCAP and NASCASP and the training centers to ask what topics folks were really engaged with and we're facing some challenges. And so that set up the structure so that the first workshop that we did this past year was focused on workforce issues. And we actually did a similar webinar with NCAP, kind of recapping it and getting some additional buy-in. And I believe that webinar is also available for folks if you want to go back and listen to that webinar as well. So for this workshop, as Allison kind of mentioned, we're framing the topics for the workshop and really was kind of looking at like where's the future of WAP going? Like where are some new directions, innovations that people are implementing or wanting to implement. And so the big one that we started off with was a discussion around electrification and decarbonization. And we know that there's a lot of interest of folks kind of combining resources from other programs to support WAP, trying to maximize the weatherization funds as much as possible to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we just wanted to start off with kind of a grounding of what we're talking about here. And so that is electrification refers to the adoption of technologies that use electricity in the place of fossil fuel resources. So in the homes, we're mostly seeing that with space heating and cooling, hot water, a little bit of cooking, and then of course there's broader transportation electrification and generation of electricity on site. Decarbonization specifically refers to reducing fossil fuel usage and the greenhouse gas emissions. So electrification doesn't necessarily guarantee decarbonization depending on what the electricity source is. So we just wanted to make that distinction. And then beneficial electrification is the term that folks often use to describe when that move towards electricity as you know, for supplying energy to the home, also reduces fossil fuel usage and has you know, emissions reductions and cost reductions. So just wanted to start off with that grounding of what these terms mean. And I do, yeah, want to reiterate Amy's comment in the slides or in the chat that these slides will be available afterwards along with the recording. So no need to like scribble down all the notes from the slides here. So I think we can go to the next slide. So, you know, in the workshop, one of the things that we did was we wanted to make sure that folks were aware of the existing resources in this space that have already been developed. And so this first item, NREL, and in fact, you know, I'm leading this project, has been doing research into the pathways for using WAP and LIHEAP funds and for solar. And so we did a webinar earlier in the summer that is linked to here. And we have been doing interviews with stakeholders, and we're holding a workshop later in the fall to identify, you know, what resources and tools would be useful for easing the implementation of solar within the two weatherization related programs. We also wanted to note that through the enhancement and innovation funding opportunity announcements and the Sustainable Energy Resources for Consumer grants, CERC, there are opportunities for folks to implement programs within using WAP funding that are a little bit outside of the typical WAP structure. And so these are specific grant programs that can be used, among other things, for efforts around decarbonization, electrification, renewable energy, but also community efforts, dealing with deferrals, workforce, that kind of thing. So as long as the program is funded above a certain level each year, DOE has the ability to offer, to make these funds available through competitive grants. So the first round of enhancement and innovation grants and CERT grants was announced over the summer, but I do want folks to know that there will be more opportunities in the next year and presumably the year following that to use these funds. And then the last piece here is just a little bit around cold climate heat pumps. There was actually quite a bit of interest, and that's most of where this discussion in the workshop focus was around heat pumps. NREL has merged with the Cold Climate Housing Research Center up in Fairbanks, Alaska. And so we have a lot of resources related to heat pumps. And then likely coming out of this workshop, we're probably going to be pulling together a bit of a toolkit on heat pump related resources and making that available to the network. So that's a little bit of a preview, but we can go to the next slide. So in the discussion around electrification and decarbonization, we kind of let the participants go in a lot of different areas, but these are the 5 main themes that came out of that discussion. And that is that fuel switching can be cost prohibitive, especially within the current limits in the program. It can be done through leveraging other funding sources, but generally folks, you know, if there was already natural gas service to the home, you know, unless one of the nuances with that, like, unless the service was entirely eliminated, you know, customers still would need to pay their fixed customer fee, and maybe say cooking was like the piece that they still wanted natural gas for. And so the client, the economics from the client perspective are a little bit hard to navigate, in addition to savings to investment ratio. So that was just a concern that folks brought up. There were also, specifically regarding heat pumps, there were concerns that not all, you know, subcontractors were fully trained in heat pumps. This led to some concern that maybe that installations were not as cost effective as they could be due to lack of subcontractor experience, and also some concerns about quality of installation. And so we had a number of training providers on the participating in the workshop. And so they identified a good number of resources actually related to heat pump training that is offered around the country. Again, this is something that we're going to try to compile and make more readily accessible. The next big theme was around client awareness. So it seemed like there was kind of a lack of consistency around how to talk with clients about these range of technologies, right, around electrification and decarbonization, heat pumps, renewable systems, and what it means for maintaining the measures that do get installed in their homes. So we see this as actually an area where it seems like there could be some additional resources developed for doing that client communication piece. Then the next point was that our participants identified that there were challenges in modeling heat pumps and dual fuel systems within the energy audit modeling software. This is, of course, updates to energy audit software take a while, but this is definitely a point that we have noted and are able to communicate back, at least to Weatherization Assistant. There are other folks who maintain other some of the other approved energy audit software tools, and so it's a little bit of it's probably going to take a little bit of work across the network just to make sure that the owners of those energy audit models are hearing from, frankly, all of you folks, that this is a feature that they want to hear, or like where the challenges are specifically in the energy models, to make sure that that we're accurately representing the impact of these systems in the homes. And then the last theme that kind of came up was just folks talking about the challenge of getting solar to work within average cost per unit limits. I will note that there is actually some interest in looking at smaller solar systems than would typically go onto residential homes. I know that there are actually folks in Colorado and Texas that are looking at maybe scaling down a residential solar system for their weatherization clients, in part to have more streamlined processes for installation on homes, that there's less need for redesign around roof shapes. In Texas in particular, there's concerns about like their net metering structures, since Texas has all kinds of deregulated rate plans. That case is probably a little more specific to their state than in other places. Yeah, so we had some discussion around like what can be done. There certainly will be additional resources coming out of this project that I mentioned, related to using WAP and LIHEAP funds for solar, and making that a little easier to implement within the program. And I know that although NREL doesn't engage in any legislative advocacy, I know that there is some movement that folks may have seen through, and maybe Amy, you could weigh in a little bit later. I know there's some legislative movement through a bill that would be a part of the national defense appropriations, I think, that would address some weatherization issues. I don't know if you want to touch on that briefly.
Yeah, so our partner entity, the National Community Action Foundation, or NCAF, they just did a newsletter about the latest development with the Weatherization Improvements Act, I can't remember what it's called, and I can't remember off the top of my head what the bill number is, but it is tying weatherization funds to that thing that you just said.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that it would address the overarching average cost per unit threshold for weatherization projects, as well as there's a specific sub-limit for how much could be spent on solar within the ACPU.
We're hoping to, well, the word that we have is that it is likely to pass, and it would include the ACPU going up to $12,000, which is a big jump. And then there are some fixes built into it as well. So it will remove some of the barriers to doing some of the things that we want to do.
Great. Okay, so thanks for that, Amy. That's really helpful.
Yeah, no problem. As a matter of fact, I'll look for a link and put it in the chat.
Perfect. Okay, so Allison, I think we can go on to the next slide here. Yeah, so I just wanted to, oop, we see not the slide. Yeah, so we wanted to pause here, see if there are questions, discussion. Also, you know, if any of you have particular challenges related to decarbonization or electrification or renewable energy, or resources that you think would be helpful, we'd love to hear some of this. And, you know, we will be able to catch this at the end, but if there's, you know, we can probably take maybe 5 or 10 minutes or so here if folks want to address it directly. And so Allison, I'll ask if you can help me with chat. Folks are welcome to, you know, raise their hand, throw questions in the chat, come off mute.
Yeah, right now there's nothing in the chat specifically pertaining to this, but I will continue to monitor.
Great. Is anyone, you know, pursuing electrification or decarbonization within your program or adjacent to your program? Because I'd love to hear your experience with that and just like where maybe some of the sticking points are, or you know, how that's going.
I'd like to say something, if that would be okay. I'm
Absolutely.
Steve Kramer from South Central Community Action Program in Bloomington, Indiana, Weatherization Program Manager. And I hear the decarbonization and electrification discussion frequently in the last, well, probably the last year and a half. And I think that many of the people, and I want to say this as kindly as I can, many of the people that are proponents of this do not see the clients that we see. I made an analogy in one of in a local discussion that we had, that the people that are doing weatherization are in the trenches, and our state agency is like on the side of the trenches looking in and talking with us. And DOE is back at the strategy tent 10 miles from the front line. And they keep talking about decarbonization and electrification. And in our area anyway, heating with natural gas is way cheaper than electric, even with an efficient heat pump. And in theory, our clients might care about decarbonization and greenhouse gases. But in practicality, they're worried about keeping food on the table for their kids. Mm-hmm. And so if we were to electrify the home of someone that has natural gas, and their heating bill went from $75 a month to $100 a month because we switched to electric, that is not a tenable direction, I guess, for that client. And I want people besides the people that are in the trenches to understand that. And I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve. You know, that is definitely one of the things that we heard, is that it may not make sense to pursue specifically decarbonization in all parts of the country, or entirely switching out a fuel source, you know, natural gas. I saw the comment in the chat about propane. Right, I mean, because really we are looking to help reduce energy consumption and generate, you know, financial savings for the clients, in addition to all the home benefits. One thing I will note is that the discussion that we had around heat pumps really depended on like how the heat pumps are being used to ensure electricity bill reduction. And this is really where I think that like client education and you know the need to model, you know, different temperature set points is really important, because the way that people will utilize their heating and cooling systems may be different from how it's modeled. And so the ability to use different set points in the modeling to check the cost effectiveness was a big takeaway that we heard from the workshop.
Yeah, and I think I'll say one more thing and then I'll be quiet. We actually, at my house, I have a dual fuel heating system. I have a propane furnace, but I have heat pump, and then the propane is my backup, emergency heat or whatever. And it works really well. And it has saved us energy when we switched away from uh, just propane. But it is an expensive system to install. You're looking at an additional, a heat pump is $6,000 to $7,000 now, and to put in a propane furnace instead of the electric heat strip air handler, you're looking at probably another $2,000. And so, even with the 12,000 ACPU, you've used up a huge chunk of that, close to $10,000 just for the dual fuel heat system.
Right.
And so it's hard to get there, I guess, in weatherization.
Yeah, and I would say with weatherization funds alone, right? Because we do know that there are some jurisdictions that are also making some specific funds available for this purpose. Of course, that's not everywhere. But yeah, thanks for that. Those are really good comments. The other thing I do want to note, and that is that, in talking with some of the folks in Minnesota who have been installing solar through weatherization and some of their other funds, the comment that I heard just 2 days ago, so I was rehearsing a panel presentation for the NASCAS conference, was that, the solar has created more savings for their clients up in Minnesota than any of the other measures, and so in part because it generates revenue rather than just reducing costs. And so it's interesting to think through, right? How do you each home is different. How do you build the stack of measures with the existing infrastructure and the customer behavior that is likely to reduce the utility bills? So yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that there's a lot of different ways to go about it. It looks like Amy has put some additional details on that bill from NCAF in the chat.
I did, thank you.
Great.
The text that came from NCAF did not go into the details of what the changes would be. As I said, it just said cut some reporting red tape, but if you click on the link, there's a deeper dive on some of the content.
Great. I want to see if anyone else had questions or experiences that they've been dealing related to electrification, decarbonization, or renewables that you wanted to raise. Okay, that's fine. If folks think of things later, certainly you can put them in the chat and we can come back to it at the end during the discussion. But I think for now then, I'll hand it back over to Allison, who will take us through the next section.
Awesome. Thank you, Juliana. Yeah, I feel like the electrification decarbonization conversation, they're such buzzwords in certain circles. To some people, those terms mean nothing, but in certain circles, they're just such buzzwords right now. And, DOE knows that we need to keep the client's interest as our number one. And so I think it's more about in places where it can make sense, how can we make that easier is really where we want to try and have those discussions. So I'm going to talk about the next section that we had as part of that August continuous improvement workshop, which is about innovations related to workforce development and training. And I will say that the last session was a lot of discussion, both in this room and in our session that we had back in August. This one is more about sharing that we welcome a lot of discussion, but we're going to be sharing a lot of sort of new tools that you may or may not have heard about that are related to workforce and training. So just to sort of frame the conversation, among other things, workforce development is one of the biggest challenges facing WAP today. So these are some stats that are national and they have to do with sort of the energy efficiency workforce overall. So it's not necessarily WAP specific, but probably paralleled or potentially even more higher issues in the WAP world. So the national energy efficiency workforce is still below the pre-pandemic levels. It's been inching up since that initial dive in 2020, but hasn't quite surpassed it yet. difficulty in hiring. Actually, I mean, it was better last year than it was in 2020, but continues to be a challenge. And then there's some links. So if you're a person that really likes reports and surveys and things, go crazy on your own time for sure. But there was an interesting survey of residential construction workers. So again, not WAP specific, but it was talking about how engaged they are in the workforce. And the answer was like, not very. Half of workers were, disengaged, which they identified as sort of like considering leaving, not particularly happy in where they are. And most of the disengagement happened at people who were newest to the industry, right? So your engagement increased as your tenure in the industry or with an employer increased. And so I think, again, it sort of indicates where some areas for emphasis can go. And then the last item, of course, that everyone probably knows, though not everybody necessarily tracks it, is that when you have staff turnover, it's costly. It costs everyone time and money, right? And the conversation in the weatherization world is often around the challenges because of ACPU and everything we've been talking about, challenges in increasing pay, right? And if you were to start tracking how much time, if you're a high turnover agency, for example, how much time you may be spending, and the dollar value that's associated with that in terms of, hiring new people, onboarding them, training them, and then if they leave, if you can start to calculate that, and trying to take that money and use it to try and keep the people you have is always a good approach. But so those are challenges framing the issue. There are, of course, things out there to try and help weatherization agencies with some of this. So I'm going to go through each of these. They're all sort of linked here, but I'm going to go through each of these in a little more detail. The only one that I won't go through because it's not yet available, so I'll mention it now, is the one at the bottom, Workforce Development Toolkit. So this is something that came out of our Juliana referenced at the first continuous improvement workshop we hosted back in May, was on the topic specifically. It was all workforce development. And one comment that we heard was like, okay, there's a lot of resources that have been developed by NCAP, NASCASP, IREC, DOE, all of these people, aimed at really supporting weatherization in this work, but they live in so many different places and it's hard to know when to use them and where, and this desire to know what other people are doing across the country. So we have been working with DOE during the summer to develop a workforce development toolkit for WAP, which is essentially going to be a web page on the sort of the DOE weatherization page that organizes and takes all of those links that exist and all of those resources everywhere, explains what they are, explains how to use them, and puts them in one place. So that one we were kind of hoping we would have it for this webinar, and we don't, but we hope to have it soon, and that will be just a good way for everyone to be seeing what is available, seeing what we have case studies for every sort of section, so you can see what other people are doing and the kind of creative solutions that a lot of agencies are coming up with to try and solve some of these workforce issues. But now I'm going to walk through some of these other resources. Some of them you may know about, some of them probably will be brand new to you, but just want to make sure everyone is on the same page. So the first one is the NASCASP wage survey. So in 2021, winter, spring of 2021, NREL worked with NASCASP to put a survey out there to the weatherization network to try and understand essentially what people are paying for the different sort of standard types of job categories that exist in the weatherization world. And so the results from that live on the NASCASP webpage. There's an interactive map that you can use to click on, states. Not everybody responded, but there were 286 agencies that did respond, which is amazing, from 27 states. So you can see what wages look like at county levels, at state levels, and averages for the states. There's this interactive map. There's a living wage calculator, which has been really useful for some agencies and state level organizations to say, we're having trouble even getting people to respond to job postings. Let's look at our wages and compare them to what are standard living wages for our county and the cost of living in our county. And then maybe we need to make some adjustments to try and make this a more desirable thing for people. So that's a cool tool. And then there are a series of career flyers that NREL worked with NASCASP to develop this past winter and spring. So they look like this. There's a picture here. But there are sort of standard ones for all the states that responded. There are also editable ones. So if you are not one of the states that did it, but you are interested, these are flyers that the intended use is for if you have someone tabling at a community event or at a job fair and you want to say, hey, we're hiring, here's some information. You can put your agency's information in there. You can put your wage information in there. Some people are using them like when they visit homes and when they're actually working on homes. If there are people looking for work who live in that home, leave the fire there. So anyway, a tool out there that you can use if you're interested in it. And then the plan is to update this hopefully in 2023 so that there will be more data. So I know everybody gets bombarded with emails and surveys and questionnaires and all those things. But if you are able to spend some time, if you see this coming around in the next 6 months or year and can fill it out, it can be useful data for a lot of people at your local agency as well as at the state level. The next resource that is out there are online administrative trainings. Again, these are things that NREL worked with DOE and IREC, the Interstate Renewable Energy Council, and others to develop. And they are focused, there's a lot of training resources I'll talk about focused on field staff. This is focused on administrative staff. So there have been trainings like this available and they're free to anybody. You just have to create a login. So there's ones for sub-grantees that have been available for a number of years. Grantee ones were developed and released earlier this summer, but it's sort of all topics that you would need to know. So preparing plans and T&TA plans and monitoring plans and crafting a budget and all of those things. So there are separate topics, resources, everything that you could ever want there in a lovely interactive format. And there are knowledge checks at the end of each section. So just want to make sure people understand that those are out there. They're a really good resource for new staff, particularly administrative staff, but in management staff, but even field staff. It can give a good sort of overview to how the program WAP is implemented and managed. Do you have something to say on that, Juliana?
I do, yeah, and that's just that if folks have additional topics that they would like to see, kind of nationally applicable training on, right? So we're not developing a state-specific training, but if there are topics that you think are applicable around program implementation and management that you think it would be helpful to have, a short course on or a series of courses, certainly feel free to throw those in the chat or reach out to us later. We do anticipate that going forward, there will continue to be development of additional online trainings. And so we would love to make sure that we're developing courses that meet your needs.
Yep. Thank you, Juliana. This is a feedback session. Any ideas you have, definitely share them. So this is one of the next couple of tools I'm going to share kind of all fit together in a fun little way, but these are all relatively new tools as well. This is the job aids were released earlier this summer, and they're basically a step-by-step visual guide to help home energy professionals in doing their upgrades. It's a good training mechanism for new staff. And so they align with the standard work specifications, the SWS, and basically every step that a retrofit installer technician might have to do in their work, there is a job aid for that. So if you go to the SWS, it's sort of like a big long bulleted list of things. And this is a little bit more user-friendly. So it includes sort of the checklist of the things that need to be done. So in this example, seal and dam around non-insulation contact rated recessed lights, right? Can lights in the ceiling. So it'll give you the steps that are needed, but it also gives you pictures of the different steps and what it looks like to be done correctly, which again, for visual learners can be a really helpful thing. You can have these, they're available digitally. You can also obviously like download them, put them in a binder and have them for a great tool for new staff when they don't necessarily know what it looks like when it's installed correctly versus not correctly. So these are a very cool thing. The next one, and this one, it'll take me a second. I'm going to switch my screen. So this is something that Juliana and I heard like an hour ago was actually approved and made live. So we're like, oh, great, we are going to do this.
This is breaking news, right?
I
just want to say,
late breaking
first
news.
Look.
You're the first to have the official link to this.
Premiere. This is a red carpet event right here.
Yeah,
and
you should
Allison,
all feel very special. Yeah,
I can describe it a little bit while you're getting that pulled together.
That sounds great.
Yeah, so basically in that recognition, right, that a lot of folks are visual learners and a little bit more experiential, NREL worked to pull together this 3D model house. And so this is the first iteration of the tool. We do expect to be able to build out additional functionality in future years. But basically what we're doing right now is we've uploaded, and maybe Allison, this is the time for me to hand it back to you since you've got it up on the screen.
Are people seeing it? Okay,
Yeah.
great. I had some things where I thought I was sharing and it wasn't actually. Okay, so if people are seeing this 3D house, is it moving as I do things? Okay, great. So this is the 3D house. So it is a 3D model of a sort of standard residential single family home. Up here in the corner is sort of your main like navigation area. So you'll see there are different regions of the house. You can look at the attic, you can look at the main living space of the house, and you can look at the basement and crawl space. But basically, it's a 3D model showing sort of different types of materials and different cutaways. But periodically, as you move through this, there are these little information icons. And what's amazing is this will tell you this is about how to treat your attic hatch. And you can click on the job aids that I was just describing, those sort of handy, pretty things with pictures and helpful information. So you can, I won't click on them because it'll take me away and I'll have trouble getting back. But you can click on each of the job aids, right? And then you can see exactly what it means to do to treat that attic hatch in the correct way according to the SWS industry standards. So again, this is supposed to be sort of like a partner tool to those job aids. And then another thing I'm going to show, but really good also for new hires. There are organizations out there that are engaged in sort of outreach and trying to build their pipeline for new workers, people who go to their local community colleges or go to their high schools or whatever and talk about weatherization. This is a very cool thing that you could bring and be like, okay, if you're going to be a weatherization worker, you might be working in a space like this. Again, not attics, or most attics are probably not this clean and tidy. However, give people a sense of the type of work that that you can do, because I think that's a challenge a lot of people in weatherization face is that like not everybody outside of weatherization even knows what that term means and what it refers to. And this is an easy way to talk about the types of work that someone in weatherization might do. So this is your attic, right? So you have insulation, bad insulation. This probably talks about the vent. Oh, nope, it doesn't. This probably, maybe this is, anyway, all sorts of things. And then you can go down, you have the same thing, sort of the main living space of the house. You can, these little circle things, you can zoom right into the kitchen and talk about, there's nothing in the kitchen. Okay, I take that back. Don't zoom into the kitchen. But anyway, it'll talk through all the different steps that you can take. And then down in the basement, you have a basement and you have sort of, your water heater, your dryers, your furnace. That's to get back upstairs. It'll talk about walls and treating the walls and probably treating the floor system. And then there's also a part of this house that is a crawl space. So you can talk about things that are done differently in a crawl space versus like a full basement. But anyway, it's a cool thing. We're excited. We know that a lot of the training centers, which I'll talk about here in a second, are interested in using them for some of their trainings, but this is going to be a free thing that anyone can use for whatever purposes feel appropriate. Are there any maybe I have to go back to my PowerPoint. If there's anything else you want to say, Juliana, or any questions specifically about this?
Yeah, so I think really the key thing is as we are this is not the last iteration of the 3D house. And so we are going to be working with partners to figure out what other functionality should be built into this. So it's definitely a check it out, use it as a resource, know that we're going to be working on it a little more further. If there are specific, if you get into it and play around, and we can drop the link in the chat momentarily. Feel free to go into play around, and if you have feedback of, oh, it'd be great if we could do this, that is absolutely feedback we want to hear, because we will be building from here.
Yes. Are you back to seeing like a slide deck looking screen?
Yep.
Okay. Were there any questions on the 3D house before I move on in the chat or anything like that? No.
Not on this specifically. Okay. I think there's been a few other things. I'll be pulling up the link and I'll drop that in the chat momentarily for folks.
And it'll be in this, all of these links will be in the slide deck that you'll have available to you. Okay, so the third piece, and this is sort of like a trilogy of job aid things. So the third piece I want to share with you is something called the Installer Badges Toolkit. So this is, again, another sort of like partner tool to go along with the other ones. It, I think, was released last year, 2021, right? Made available. It's relatively recent. That's okay. Yeah. And so what this is it takes, again, the tasks that are specific to that retrofit installer job category. And for all of those tasks, if you have new hires or if you're running some sort of training program or something, or internship, it's sort of like a micro credentialing toolkit that you can use. So this is something that you can go onto a website and you can download. You'll get a zip file full of things. But for every one of those tasks, these are examples of it. You can basically, you have a number of resources that are pre-made that you can customize and change however you want to help track how people are gaining these skills, right? So there's an example, I think, on the next slide. Yeah. So there's a passport, right? And in this passport, basically, if you want to say, I want to make sure that my new person that I have hired has done each of these things, or only a subset of these things, right? Not everybody necessarily does everything, but you know, and I want to track how many times they've done it, if they've done it correctly, all of those things. And so you can use this passport, and again, you can adapt it to however you want to use it. You can say the job number they were on, the date that they did this thing, have the tech sign off, and then you designate an inspector, someone who can verify that they did it accurately and correctly, and all of those things. But again, it's a ready-built thing that we've seen training organizations use it. We've actually seen, we've seen weatherization training centers, some are using it. We've actually seen a number of non-WAP specific training organizations who are doing related training start to use it to train their people. But I think it can also be used by agencies if you want to help for new hires to sort of like track them through their first, say, 90 days or 6 months or something like that, so that you can see what it is they're actually getting. They can, you know, maybe they're in charge of their passport or whatever, and they maintain it, and you talk through it at your check-ins or something like that. So it's a flexible tool that's made to be adaptable and hopefully usable. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to add, you know, this is the reason that this the badging toolkit was kind of pulled together, is that there's a recognition that not every retrofit installer technician needs to do every single job that is covered by the job task analyses and the SWS. And so this is really a recognition that it allows you know, individual employees to kind of and agencies to kind of customize the training and the skills development to what they will actually see in the field. So we, you know, it is really nice that it can kind of just be, you know, pulled together in a way that is specific to each situation. And
Yeah.
I will note, I just put the link to the badging toolkit in the chat, along with the link to the 3D house.
Thanks, Juliana. And I will say, when we talk about workforce development, it means a lot of things. It includes sort of creating your pipeline and finding people and bringing them in and building awareness, but it includes skill development, and it includes like making sure people you hire have a clear career pathway and have like they can see themselves moving through an organization in whatever way that might look like, right? Or through an industry. Sometimes, you know, your organization may not be able to serve someone through their entire career because there aren't opportunities, but this is sort of a tool to help with that pathway, right? When someone enters on day one, you can say, hey, we want, you know, we have this goal for you to accomplish these, to get these badges in your first whatever timeline you deem appropriate, you know, 6 months or something like that, or 12 months or whatever that looks like, right? And you can tie things to it, like you can tie raises to it or promotions to it, or just like recognition for them, right? And it allows them to understand how they can progress. And so, you know, that sort of career pathway jargon can be a little confusing in terms of how do you actually do it, but this is an example of a way that you can make it very clear to new hires ways that they can gain new knowledge and new skills and have opportunities to grow in their job. So that is the Installer Badges Toolkit. And then the last item is just a reminder that these are all sort of use yourself or DIY tools or things like that are available that you can use in different ways. But of course, there are the 23 weatherization training centers across the country that, you know, all of these locations that you see on this map, and the map lives on the NASCASP webpage, but they're accredited. These are training providers that are accredited by IREC, and they all provide at least one of this training for at least one of the 4 job titles. I'm getting these words, retrofit installer, energy auditor, QCI crew leader, not necessarily in that order. And then a number of them provide training related to all of those. And then there's a lot of, so all of these provide, some things online, some things in person. Some of them have, labs so that you can actually go in and someone who's brand new can do some things in sort of a controlled environment before going out onto someone's home and testing things out. Some of these training centers, as Juliana mentioned earlier, are starting to develop some really cool, like a heat pump lab, right? That's just around heat pumps and sort of specific technologies where there's not a lot of resources available out there. And they're all doing, some of them are running workforce programs that build a pipeline directly to local weatherization agencies for new workers. And they're doing all that training right there before someone even becomes an intern or a staff or something like that. Some of them are doing things, they're making sure they're offering bilingual opportunities for people, or there's just a lot of innovative things that are happening at different locations, and we're not going to go through all of those, but you can go to this website, you can go to their, to the different places and see if maybe there are offerings. And these are not free offerings, but they are available to weatherization agencies, and they have things that they offer that are really targeted specifically towards supporting WAP agencies. So those are our workforce highlights. I don't know if there are any questions on sort of this section that we can answer.
So I think we've kind of addressed the items in the chat. A large part of it was providing the links to those resources. But again, yeah, I think if there's additional questions or resources or resources that you all are aware of that maybe you want to share with your peers that would be helpful to go out after this call, we definitely have the time to take a few questions or comments.
This is Tom Price, City of Baltimore, DHCD. I just started as the construction project supervisor in this new position. Previously, I was with CHP as a building science trainer. And prior to that, I was with SMS as an energy advisor. I just want to say I have 2 brand new staff members who in this very moment are using the DOE resource to get them a good introduction to the WAP program. It does seem very much geared towards the programmatic side. Would love to see some more resources on more of the technical things that they're going to be encountering. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I think, Tom, part of the reason the online trainings that DOE developed and that NREL helped develop with IREC, those were focused on kind of the programmatic tasks, in part because there hadn't been this systematic or consistency of approach prior. But then also there's an element of, we know that there are training centers around the country that do more of the technical work, and that does, the approaches and the technologies get updated on a regular basis. And we wanted to make sure we were not competing with that, and that they were also able to maintain the quality of the content in a way that was easy to maintain. However, as you're bringing those new staff on, if there are specific items that you think like an online training would be really helpful that maybe they can't get from the local from a training center or through the resources that you have available, certainly let us know, because like I said, we are still collecting ideas for additional training topics.
Great.
And I will add to that, I mentioned that there's going to be this workforce development toolkit that just tries to we've been like, this lives on IREC and this lives on this thing and this lives here, putting it all in one place. If there are things that would help you in outreaching, hiring new staff, onboarding, upskilling, all of the things that are sort of workforce related, if there are certain elements of that you've not been able to find anything to help you do this, and that you can think of something that could be useful, let us know, because again, the job through these continuous improvement workshops is to identify those gaps and see where DOE, through some of its partners, can try to actually fill those gaps with resources and in different ways. And so you can send that information to Amy. You can send it to any of us, any of those ways. But like, really, our goal is we don't want you guys scrambling to find resources to do some of this work, because it's already been a challenge for a number of years in terms of hiring and upskilling and all of those things. And it's just going to get a little more crazy in the coming years as more funding comes through. So we want to do all we can to support that.
Yeah, and it's exciting. Like I said, I've got 2 new staff members. I have to hire 2 more staff members. So, and the experience level is so different. You know, one of the things that I am looking for right now, maybe if somebody, I'm sure it exists, I just haven't been able to find a good resource for some basic computer skills. Would be really helpful for my particular situation right now. And one of the things that I want to mention as far as workforce development that I'm very interested in, fortunately in Baltimore, I don't think it's going to be a problem, but that's hiring a diverse workforce. So more females and more minorities. I don't want my staff to look just like me.
Mm-hmm. Juliana's handling the next section, and while she's doing that, I will try and search, because there are some things out there that they're not like deep dives into any of that, but there are some resources that DOE through some of its other channels have done around like checking your job descriptions. Are you using like gendered language, for example, in your job description that you might, that like a lot of people may not notice, but like that may be a barrier that you're not even. So I will find those links and drop them in the chat. And then Juliana, it sounds like you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, and Allison, I think this is actually a really good moment to reiterate that webinar we did earlier in the summer with NCAP covering the workforce development continuous improvement workshop, which has a lot of those resources pulled together. And as Allison mentioned early on, we will shortly be making a workforce development toolkit available that will be kind of a more centralized location for that. And I see Amy has her hand up.
Oh, if I could say one more thing, a training needs analysis, that would be really helpful for me too.
When you say training needs analysis, do you mean an entity to conduct a training needs analysis, or guidance on how to conduct one?
Or like guidance on how to.
So like a tool to screen new employees to understand what they know.
Yeah, exactly. So I can see what training my staff would really need the most.
Yeah, and I know that IREC has actually pulled together a toolkit on that. So again, we'll try to find the link and put that in.
Okay. Thanks.
Amy.
Well, I just wanted to give a shout out to NASCAS, because I know that what we were talking about gendered recruitment information, and in one of the sessions that they did at our conference with Jeff Wilcox, who is with the state of Vermont, they had a segment about ways to alter your recruitment content to attract more women in weatherization. So NASCAS has I don't know if we have anyone in the meeting today from NASCAS, but I know that NASCAS has an agenda or maybe an initiative, or is a better word for it, but they have been looking for ways to recruit women in weatherization and highlight case studies of women in weatherization. And it was beyond just using gendered language, but they talked about like refining things like the weight that like if a job says you must be able to lift 50 pounds, maybe it doesn't really need to be 50 pounds, it could be 25 pounds. And if you have content like that could be off-putting to females, and there's similar things like that could be off-putting to a diverse workforce, that like Tom was highlighting, that a non-BIPOC recruiter or employer might not think of. So I think that content, I can look for it and post it in the chat as well. But that's probably going to be incorporated in some of the toolkit content that you were talking about, right?
Yes. And I just put the DEI fact sheet from Better Buildings, which is about, so it's aimed at training providers, but it's the same sort of about best practices for diversifying. And it's it's just a fact sheet, so it's not in depth, but it provides a good starting place for a lot of those things. And then I will look for that IREC thing. Oh, unless you found it.
Yeah, so one of the trainings in the subgrantee series is actually on training needs analysis and has a bunch of resources. And so I think that's probably the best place to go, Tom, on that topic. So I think let's go on. We have just a little bit more content we want to cover, and then we can open it up to open dialogue. So the last piece that we touched on in that continuous improvement workshop was just kind of about like the systems and processes that people use internally. So probably a bit more on the like administrative side of things. And so, you know, we had some folks share kind of what they're doing with digital signatures out in the field. I think there was a lot of interest about that in reducing paperwork and maintaining adequate records, along with document digitization. You know, there are a bunch of resources out there, and this is one of those areas where, you know, we knew that we were not going to be able to capture all of the useful tools and apps that people are using. And so I think, you know, Amy, this is maybe an area where NCAP is probably the better partner to be compiling and sharing that out. I'm not sure what you have in that space, but maybe I'll give you an opportunity to weigh in.
No, I can't think of anything in particular.
Okay, so I will say there were a few resources that we can go to the next slide here, Allison. A few resources that our participants shared that we wanted to make sure all of you had access to as well. So some of these are tools or calculators for field staff to make their work a little faster while they're out in the field, or doing the some of the analysis of the home characteristics, that kind of thing. So those first four are non-WAP resources that folks within WAP have found a lot of value in using. And so again, you'll have access to all these links through the slide deck after the training. The last two are kind of more approaches that folks are taking. Through the Department of Energy, there was what's called the eRobot Prize, which was basically looking at trying to encourage private industry to help develop robotic tools that could go into, you know, crawl spaces and attics and places where people may not be able to access because of size, and also the places that maybe people don't really want to be crawling around in the dirt and dust and everything. So Allison, actually, can I ask you to just weigh in on the status of the eRobot Prize?
I have not heard anything about it since the thing happened earlier in the summer. I apologize. I have no new updates.
I'm okay. So, so this prize is going on. You know, we do expect that it will result in some additional technologies that may be of use to the network. It's an ongoing process. And then some of the other, one of the other, approaches that our participants shared was giving GoPro cameras to staff to help with troubleshooting in the home. And that actually directly relates to, I think if we go to the next slide here. Yeah, so one of the things that we spent a little bit of time talking about was around remote mentorship and what that could look like. And while, you know, there needs to be in-person final inspections done on the units, there's also a lot of opportunity to use remote tools to help with, you know, in-process inspections or working with staff who are maybe a little newer and just want a little bit more check on their work before it goes, you know, before the job is completed. And so we wanted to mention that, you know, DOE allows for grantees to adopt a mentorship model for kind of QCIs in progress, where they basically work with a certified quality control inspector who verifies their work quality to help get that additional capacity built. And so it means it's less work for the individual, for the already certified QCI, because they won't have to be doing all that work, but it also provides that quality check. So we did want to note that there's that process in place. But then if we go to the next slide, Allison, yeah, so you know, one of the things we did was Corey Shavanik, who's our colleague at NREL and previously worked at Slipstream in Wisconsin, he and I put together a little video of how you might be able to use, you know, a streaming video, you know, either through GoPro or just through his cell phone, you know, over Zoom or, you know, any kind of live streaming app, to kind of walk through and like set up a check for like a blower door. And in this example, he hadn't seen a smart thermostat before, you know, as playing the role of the contractor. And so, you know, I was able to walk him through what he would look for, and you know, just doing it live, I think, can create a lot of value, especially when field staff encounter unexpected situations. So all that is to say is that you know, that I think that one of the big silver linings to come out of the pandemic was this increased use of remote tools, and using it for that workforce training side of things. Now, of course, inspections still have to be done in person, but you know, in terms of providing staff support, ensuring quality, and you know, minimizing the drive time and travel time for more senior staff, there's a lot of value in there. So if folks are doing work remotely with videos and kind of in progress work, again, we'd love to hear it and collect some of those ideas and experiences. So Allison, I think we can go to the next slide, and we can just click through just a couple of additional resources here. We touched about data management systems. NASCASP has a really good webinar on selecting data management systems. We had one of our participants talk through the system that was actually developed at the subgrantee level and then was implemented across over 20 agencies in California for tracking job progress and everything. You know, we had folks who had been involved in developing data management systems, you know, custom, working with a software provider to develop a custom data management system, as well as kind of off-the-shelf data management systems. And with both, the key lesson learned was it took more staff time than they expected on both sides. So even with off-the-shelf data management systems, configuring it so that it worked for weatherization still required a little bit more staff time than most folks budgeted for. So it's it's definitely useful to have a consistent system, you know, and where there's you know, other entities to provide support or the ability to use it broadly across subgrantees or an entire state, you know, that can ease the implementation costs. So I think if we go to the next slide, I think that is it. So at this point, you know, that's kind of all of the subject stuff that we covered in the workshop. Obviously, in this webinar that's, you know, 90 minutes long, we're not going to be able to get as in depth as we did with this day-long workshop, but we really wanted to make sure that we're sharing the resources that came out of it. And, you know, if there are any questions or resources that you all would like to see that you know, these topics have prompted, we have the time to have that discussion now. So it's kind of open the floor if you want to come off mute and ask a question or ask any other questions in chat, or share your experiences or challenges that maybe you're not sure how to address, but it would be helpful if someone did something to help you with it. Like, these are the ideas we want to capture. So first, I want to kind of throw out that question that I touched on is anyone doing like remote, like live streaming or using video to help with training or quality checks in process? If you are, you know, certainly please throw that in the chat. one of the suggestions we got from the workshop was to maybe pull together a list of like best practices for how to use that, or how to do video streaming, how it can be useful. So.
I have a random question for you, Julie.
Great.
So you meant, this is getting back to Tom's comment about having like a training needs analysis for new hires. Or I guess it doesn't have to be new hires, but and you said that, so there's one particular session in the online administrative trainings that deals with that. I know there are some resources that are in the background, right? You can download PDFs of different things for different sessions. Do you know if there is like an evaluation tool, like a document that I could maybe like link to on the workforce development toolkit, for example?
I would need to check with IREC.
Okay.
I know that there is a specific request for proposals toolkit for training and technical assistance services that is uploaded into that course. I don't know if it lives, where else it might live online. So that's, I think, a question that we can follow up on. But that toolkit really covers a lot of ground. Okay, it looks like we got a comment from Linda. Yeah, that for their crews, if they have a question, they use their mobile phone to FaceTime with the supervisor so they can show what they're talking about. It's really informal, but works really well. That's excellent, Linda. Great to hear. Are there other resources, maybe not necessarily related to the specific content we covered today, that you've just been thinking like, gosh, it would be really great if we could figure out a way to do this better?
Open forum. Open forum.
All throughout there as well, from California. My name is Pamela Gorsuch. We tested a software that's web-based called Stream for use as well as a training tool. So we were able to send the equipment very easily to somebody. They would either use like a chest strap or a forehead strap, so that we could see through the person's cell phone, which would attach to this special strap. And then we could see through their phone what they were looking at and provide them feedback. We could take snapshots as they were working of certain things, circle things, make notes on it for them, and they could look back and see it on their phone as well to know what we were indicating. And it worked pretty well. And it also keeps like the entire transcript of the call gets saved also. So that was pretty helpful for us in California. It hasn't developed into anything further because, as in the way of things, COVID interfered. But it was fun while it lasted.
And Pamela, was that just like it sounds like a temporary trial of that platform? Is that correct?
We were testing a few different uses of it, some to do with quality control, others to deal with field questions as they came in, that type of thing. Or if somebody had a specific need, we would be able to send them that equipment. And we tried different ones. Like I said, the chest strap, the head strap, there was a tripod, just whichever worked best for that person. It would be like a little small kit that we would send to them. They would throw it on and go ahead and just dial into the call with us, and it worked really well.
Great, thanks. Are there any other like innovative approaches that folks have been using that you think other folks would benefit from hearing about? All right. I think we're happy to give people about 15 minutes of their day back if we don't. We do want to make sure that if there are items for feedback for DOE, maybe that like you'd like us to filter back up or anything, this is This is totally like, consider this like an extension of the continuous improvement workshops. We can take these ideas, kind of compile them together. So if you do have any other thoughts, maybe we'll stay on like an extra 5 minutes, but I think we can largely wrap up and hand it back to Amy.
Great. Thank you so much for all of that wonderful content. I want to thank everybody for joining us today and for engaging in the discussion and answering so many questions and posting so many questions. This was a very informative session. There were a couple of people who asked whether or not the supplemental links would be available in the follow-up email, and the answer is yes. Some of them are in the slides themselves, but I will be sending out to everybody who registered for the webinar a link to the recording of the webinar, a PDF of all the slides, and in the body of the email, there'll be a series of links that relate to the conversations that we were having today. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to reply to that email when it comes out, or send me an email at aenglish@communityactionpartnership.com. And then, of course, we also have the contact information for our presenters in the slides as well. So any of us would love to hear from you. As Allison and Juliana said, this is like an extension or a continuation of the continuous improvement workshop process. And so feedback from the network is invaluable to DOE. And we look forward to having more conversations like this in the future. If there's nothing else, I think we can go ahead and give everyone exactly 15 minutes of their day back.
Thank you, everybody.
I'm just going to survey the room and see if anyone has a raised hand or anything. Otherwise, we will say goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thanks all.
Bye.